Hello there, and welcome to what will be the final episode for my no cards build log for Stronghold Kingdoms. Now, this episode is being filmed, recorded a couple of days over 7. Usually I do a week in review style, but this week we have 9 days that I'm covering. Now, it's important to know that I am largely going to be quitting this world after I finish this series. I've said this multiple times before, but if the world itself had actually been more active, I would have been compelled to stay and help my house and stuff. As it turns out, what went down with House 10 and House 1, it really leaves me or puts me and my former faction members in a situation where we were all forced to split apart. Now, if you recall, my former house, I should say, House 11, they declared war on House 12, and House 10 had sort of promised to remain neutral. They really didn't care as long as their players weren't being attacked. What proceeded to go down was House 12, which is now largely House 1. House 12, one of their factions split off and joined House 10. And once in House 10, that faction continued attacking my faction. It's interesting how it divided up into sort of a faction versus faction war. The entirety of House 11 had decided to declare war on House 12, but since House 12, which is now House 1, I don't know if I need to always mention that, because I guess it could be a little bit confusing now that I'm actually in House 12. But what had happened was, the consensus was to declare war on House 12. Unfortunately, the only players that really attacked House 12 were the ones in my faction, the Roughnecks. And that led to some bad blood between House 12 and my house. But unfortunately, my house wasn't taking the responsibility for it. Just the one faction that was actually doing the majority of the attacking ended up taking most of the heat for this. And their conditions were that Sweetleaf, the faction general, needed to leave the faction. And I think also that the faction would have to be disbanded. They didn't want the Roughnecks around anymore. A lot of these players who sort of championed for the disbanding of the Roughnecks had former history with them. They'd fought them on and off since day 30, I think maybe day 20 was when the first war was declared, but the point is they had been fighting them for quite some time. They were sort of arch nemesis, and I am okay with losing. A lot of the time I've spent in this game has actually been the people that I sided with losing. I'm okay with that. What I'm not so chill with is the underhanded method by which these people that were fighting us generally operate. As I mentioned, one of the factions split off from House 12, who we declare war on, and they joined House 10 and proceeded to attack. This dragged House 10 into the entire conflict, and they are the ones who ultimately put the pressure on House 11 to make them drop their former faction, the Roughnecks, which I was a part of. So there isn't a whole lot left here for me. I am no longer in House 11. I don't really agree with what they did. The unfortunate thing is nobody stuck up. Nobody was willing to see the server remain even a little bit active. Everybody's done with it. They want it to be over with. So the question is why did House 11 want to remain on the map? I think they should have just gone out with it, and I would have gone out with them. That would sort of been a great conclusion to my time spent in this world. As it turns out, they made peace with House 10 and House 1 now, and pretty much left just my faction on their own. Now, fighting unbeatable odds is, you're never going to win, but on your own, I didn't have the time to do it. Yeah, me, a couple of other officers, I wasn't an officer, by the way, and Sweetleaf I think we're pretty much targeted for removal by House 10. But, you know, we could have sort of banded together and fought it out, but really, it takes a lot of time. You're going to be committing at least 10 hours a day to the game, and I just don't have that kind of time, which is one of the main reasons why I play as I do. You know, I'm largely a farmer in this game. I know how to build. I do know how to fight. It's just it takes so much time to actually fight, and I have other things that I need to do, or that I would prefer to do. And so that sort of, you know, sometimes my ethics, I guess you could say, are too ideal. I'm a bit too idealistic. For example, after I joined this new faction, it's the only faction that's in House 12, after I received an invite and I said, yeah, what the hell, let's just join them. And then House 1 contacted me and they said, you know, we're not done with you yet. You know, you may have dropped from House 11. You may have never attacked us, because the attacking that I did was on that faction that's now in House 10. I never attacked what is currently House 1. But they wanted me to give up a village and a parish to make peace with them. I could have said, okay, let's go out in a blaze of glory here. But then I started thinking about it, and I realized that I wasn't actually going to do anything. I would just be sitting there on ID, busy with other things, and having them not attack me or try to excommunicate me until I ran out of faith points. Now, that either I was in the same situation I was before, they're probably a little bit more hostile for me being so obtuse about the entire thing, but I would be in the same position I was before, and I'd either be removed or I'd have to accept their surrender terms, and their surrender terms would likely be worse that time around. What is really interesting about this is I was probably contacted 4 days ago now regarding the conditions of surrender, and I agreed to them at approximately four days ago. And yet I've yet to be contacted about giving up a village. I mean, the parish they want is Lebanon, which is a shame, because that, of course, is the parish that's most built up that I have, but, you know, you have to make do with the terms that are given to you when you lose. But I guess the point here that I'm trying to make is there isn't anything left in this world for players who are looking to fight. Now, I really wasn't looking to fight, which is interesting enough, but to keep me playing it after hitting Prince, I would have to be. There is really nothing else. I mean, I've played the farming game before. I'm farming other worlds. There is really nothing unique enough about USA 3 that would make me want to farm this one with 40 villages. It's sort of been done before by me, and I really don't need the time sink, because taking care of 40 villages takes quite some time. If you consider you have to repair the castles on all of them every 3 days or so. Otherwise, you start losing vast chunks of it to the AI, because the AI is very persistent. So there's really nothing to keep me here, which makes me think maybe I should have just let them take everything. I don't know. If I'd been with House 1, I mean, if I'd been with House 11 and they all went for it, I probably would have I would have invested some time in just mucking around with House 1. Probably not House 10, you know. Most of them I think I'm on pretty good terms with, so it'd be unfortunate that they decided to declare war on us, but, you know, what are you going to do? What's really interesting about this, like I said, I haven't been contacted since, which makes me think House 1 might not be all that active after. I'm sure they have a few core active players, but the majority of the house might not be very active. I don't know. Maybe I would have stood a chance against it. Kind of doubt it, but, you know, stranger things have happened, I guess. So my entire faction is gone. That Sweetleaf is gone. He was the faction general. There's really nothing to keep me here, but I will be, I saved it. So you'll actually get to see me rank up to Prince. So there we go. Prince 25th in line. And I can go up 2 more sub ranks, 24th and 23rd. So that pretty much accomplishes what I set out to do on this world. And I thought maybe it'd be nice to do a brief recap of my story, of how things went down in this world. If you remember, when I first entered the world, I randomly spawned into the parish of Wilmington, and I was quite disappointed by that, because when you are isolated in a small county such as this, it limits your trading possibilities. I had to do a couple of bubbles of research into, just a second here, into commerce, just to be able to trade with the parish of Delaware right across the border. You know, it's not that far away. If this was my first village, you know, it's a 10-minute or so run. What is that? Yeah, it would be a 10-minute run. So I was quite disappointed in that, but I made do with the situation, and on the plus side, it allowed me to trade with my parish for higher prices much longer. So that is an upside if you're in a less active world such as this USA 3 was. Then I was approached by a player that I knew from World 5, who his name was, well, maybe I shouldn't use his name. His name was Zakavos, and he was starting a faction. He was heading up a faction on USA 3. There's going to be a fighting faction, and they ultimately joined House 10, and later on they were moving. The House 11, House 10 alliance was moved around, and I think we ended up joining House 11. Maybe it was the other way around. I don't remember exactly, but it was one or the other. One house or the other that the good faction switched into. And then we ended up fighting that war against Lube Junkie. And that's when Jeeth first made an appearance. You know, Jeeth is sort of my long-time nemesis on this map. Apparently he really does. He has a thing for me. I've only attacked his players, not him. I've never actually attacked him. I mean, for example, this parish, this village, I mean, here was one of his faction members' villages, and I captured it with the help of a couple of faction members. I have never attacked Jeeth, and it seems he has a strange fascination with me. This was also used to be his parish, so maybe that was another thing about it. Another player who is allied with us actually took the parish, and when he moved out, he gave it to me. But that's sort of out of chronological order, and I'm getting a bit off topic. So after that, the first piece was made, I had to give up my villages inside Wilmington, both of them. One of them got razed. Well, first Lube Junkie razed the one that was down here. Then another one got razed by, was it JJ Cashful? I know Coda Bear did the actual raise, but another one of his faction members actually opened the castle. So, you know, Coda Bear, it probably has his village right here, and he's vassal to whatever the player was. I can't think of his name, but yeah, he sent a full vassal army against my village. It was within the time span of like 5 minutes. While I was sleeping, I was taking a nap for about 30 minutes, and I wake up and my entire village is gone, which made me mad. And they wanted me to give up the other village, and I ended up doing that and moving them both into Baltimore. And oh man, what happened after that? Well, then my faction general quit. Kavos quit because he had, you know, stuff going on in real life, and the game was a real strain for him. He was trying to invade California at the time because House 11 and House 10 were now fighting House 9. It was fun. You know, I guess it was too much for him, but it was fun at the time because my house specifically stated that it wasn't their intent, despite the fact that there were two houses at the time. They wanted the world to remain competitive. That was their idea. They weren't going to make super PAC alliances or anything. And I think it would have worked out better if my house had actually been the victors in all this. But there were too many divisions between them, and pretty much the entire alliance broke down. And you know, Jeeth and his faction, they were very good. They were very good players. They stayed in the war zone the entire time. They were heavy carders, of course, but you know, they also put in a lot of time, the time needed to be successful at carding, because just having cards alone is not going to win you a war. You got to put in the time, and they put in the time. and I respect them for that. But it's unfortunate that they had to use some of the more underhanded tactics that they did. There was a good deal of trash talking between enemies, but then when isn't there, I guess? But Jeeth and his faction, I don't even remember. He doesn't seem to be loyal to one faction anyway, but they won that war. And, as concessions, House 11, House 10 was moved over to another faction. They took over House 10, and then, man, so many other houses just started flipping to it. You couldn't even keep track of the old alliances anymore. So many House 10 there are former enemies in House 10, and people that we fought when we were in House 11, in House 11 10 alliance, but they took House 10. And I suppose that sounds confusing, but it was at the time. They took the house that we vacated and they made it a bigger house, and they won ultimately. House 9, they used to be on the map for a while. Apparently House 10 did actually declare war on them and just removed them from the map. There was no stopping them. And then when it sort of brings us up to the moment here, just a little while ago, when House 11 declared war on House 12, House 10 got involved, and then House 16 says, well, if House 11 decides to fight House 10, we're going to be fighting them too. They're going to be fighting House 11 as well, which really didn't make any sense. I mean, is there any sense of fair play in the map? You could already tell that House 11 was going to get steamrolled if they fought House 10. Why does House 16... If anything, they could have looked at it and said, this is our last chance to make something competitive of the server. Why don't we give it one more shot before this age is over? But they didn't, and you end up with what you have here. It's pretty much a farming world now. For players looking to learn the ropes of the game, I suppose that would be a good thing. This gives you a real chance to enter the game without much pressure, political pressure either way, because it's pretty much everybody's allied now. But if you're looking for war, if you're spoiling for a fight, you're going to have to try another server. And at the moment, I would recommend the Global Conflict 1 server. That's likely where you're going to see the most combat for the foreseeable future, probably the next few months at the very least. I didn't do any quests, because, like I said, I'm pretty much done with this world. But in total, I completed 142 by the time I finished. I believe there were like 170 or something. There were quite a few. But I'd say I completed 2/3 of them. My best achievements, of course, were AI killing achievements and Ballista Crazy. If we take a look at some of my best rankings, I'm currently Worker rank 16. Which once again is pretty decent considering I'm only a Duke with 8 villages. I think all of the higher ranking ones are actually Prince, so I'm producing a good amount of, stockpile goods. With Brewer, I'm ranked 19. Once again, that's pretty good. Farmer ranked 19. AI Killer 27, and Quester 71. Most of these are pretty decent numbers, but then again, there are only just under 3,000 players in this world, so there isn't a whole lot of activity here anymore. I mean, out of those 3,000 players, how many of them are actually playing it full time? They're not playing over in Global Combat, I don't know, but I suspect most of them are playing 2 worlds at the very least. As far as research goes, not a whole lot of excitement here, but I did complete armor working research. So if I was to jump back into any sort of war, let's say in Age 2 or something, I've got that researched all the way up. I'll be making 250% armor. I'm working on pole turning right now. And if we look at what I have left, I can always go for the banquet buildings. I should unlock those yet. Iron mining is probably going to be needed if I'm going to be mass making weapons, because I can really max out a village with weapon workshops. Over here in military, I still have diplomacy to do. That's important. The pillaging vaults, that's not that important. You may have noticed I didn't put any research points into the sword technology. I haven't even unlocked swordsman. This is because under most circumstances, pikemen pretty much perform all roles admirably. I've heard players with good success stories concerning swordsmen, but they definitely are in the minority. I guess some players can make them work, but they're low resistance against ranged projectiles makes them less desirable than pikemen under the vast majority of circumstances. But yeah, I would finish that for sure. And of course, peasants. The great thing about maxing conscription is it actually increases the health points of the peasants that come out of your tunnels. So if you have a tunnel placed in your village, maxing conscription will actually double their health points, which is important. So I'd probably max conscription before sword. That's also a good one. I mean, some people might say, you know, I haven't maxed it yet. Why would I ever? Because it's unlikely you'll be using peasants as attack force for anything once you get past like the first week in the game. But given the fact that by researching conscription, it also increases the health points of peasants that come out of your village tunnels, that is a very compelling reason to do so. Of course, with foraging the scouts, I didn't research any foraging. I really don't see any need to at this point in the game at all. It'd be one of the later researches for sure. Now that I am Prince, of course, I can gain up to 15 villages in the first stage. So with a little bit of research and some more honor, I could do that. I still have tactics to complete and 3 more bubbles to get all of my captains. All 5 per village. Right now I'm capped at 2. Yeah, as far as farming goes, I completely neglected vegetables and bread and fish. So I went all in for the Highland strat for passive honor. In education, pretty good, pretty balanced. I could max out baptism, I suppose, but blessing and marriage and whatever. What's this? Marriage and confirmation, both. Of course, any real good player any player who's serious about passive honor is probably going to be maxing out the justice buildings as well, especially the gibbet. That is definitely worth investing in. Stockpile, it's always good stuff. I really don't know where I'd put my next research points, where I'd allocate them after I finish poll turning. Maybe into conscription, or I'm really thinking about increasing my stockpile capacity. That's important because right now I could be building up weapons, but I've reached my limit and I haven't been selling them, so that's why I'm down to only 17,000 gold. Yeah, it's been a ride, you know. Over 33% of a year I spent working on this, and it takes a while. You know, if I wanted to max out the complete research tree, now that research times are around 20 hours, it could take me another year to do it. So I think that's it. That's really all that I have to say about the finale. As always, you know, I'm glad those of you who stuck around to watch it did, and maybe with the next world, I hope to be doing more of a banquet strat build. I think that would be fun. It'll be a change of pace for me, because I've done this passive stuff for years now, and there really isn't a whole lot new to see. Once you've done it once, you've pretty much done it 1,000 times, I guess. So doing a banquet strat would be interesting, and I think a lot of players who watch would be interested in seeing something to that effect as well. So hopefully there's that to look forward to. Maybe when Firefly opens a new world, I don't really want to kill off a series without trying to replace it with something, but at the moment I don't have anything to immediately replace it with. I'll try to do more tutorials on Stronghold Kingdoms now that having to document this world has been removed from my queue, so to speak. Yeah, so pretty much sums up my no cards build log. Thank you to everyone for sticking around and watching it, and I hope to see you next time.